Have you ever truly stopped to consider the nature of power? Not the kind you see on news channels or in political debates, the kind that's declared and publicly debated, but the kind that operates in the shadows, shaping cities, industries, and even destinies without ever truly revealing its face? It's a force as old as human civilization itself, a hidden current running beneath the surface of our neatly ordered world. And in the heart of one of the world's most iconic cities, New York, during a tumultuous and transformative era, this hidden power found its ultimate, brutal expression in figures who, despite their notoriety, often remain shrouded in myth. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. I'm fascinated to see how these stories resonate across different corners of the globe. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on one such figure, a man whose name, while perhaps not as widely known as some of his contemporaries, represents a pivotal, violent turning point in the annals of organized crime. We're going to explore the life and dramatic fall of Paul Castellano, a man who sought to modernize an empire built on tradition, only to be undone by the very forces he tried to control. His story isn't just about a crime boss, it's a profound exploration of loyalty, ambition, the relentless pursuit of change, and the brutal consequences when those forces collide head-on. It's a narrative that challenges our conventional understanding of power dynamics, demonstrating to how even in the most tightly controlled environments, the seeds of dissent can lead to seismic shifts that reshape entire worlds. This is a story that goes beyond mere headlines, delving into the human element of power, its seductions, and its ultimate cost. Our journey begins in the bustling, working-class borough of Brooklyn, New York, on June 26, 1915. This is where Paul Castellano entered the world, born to Italian immigrant parents who, like countless others, had arrived on American shores seeking opportunity and a better life. Life in those burgeoning immigrant communities was a relentless pursuit of stability. For a young Paul, as for many children of his generation, formal education wasn't a prolonged affair. He dropped out of school in the 8th grade, a decision that, while common for the time, speaks volumes about the immediate and pressing need to contribute to the family's well-being. Imagine Brooklyn in those days, a vibrant tapestry of cultures, languages, and dreams, but also a crucible of hardship, fierce competition, and deeply ingrained cultural traditions. For a young man like Paul, the path forward often wasn't paved with academic degrees, but with hard work, street smarts, and an intimate understanding of the intricate, often unspoken, rules of the neighborhood. Paul started working in his father's butcher business, a seemingly innocuous trade that, for him, became a subtle gateway to a much larger and more perilous world. It was here, amidst the aroma of fresh meat and the clang of the cleaver, that he first encountered the parallel economy of the numbers game, the silent transactions that offered a fleeting hope of escape from poverty for so many. This seemingly small task of collecting receipts quietly introduced him to the nascent networks of organized crime, to the individuals who operated outside the traditional lines of law and order, yet held a peculiar kind of power. There's a certain poetic irony in a man who would one day orchestrate vast criminal enterprises, starting his journey amidst cuts of meat and the everyday dealings of a local shop. It speaks to the humble origins from which even the most formidable figures can emerge, reminding us that every complex narrative has its simple, often gritty beginning. It was here, in the daily grind of the butcher shop, that Paul absorbed the unspoken lessons of loyalty and discretion, the foundational principles of omerta, the code of silence, which was as much a part of the immigrant community's survival as it was a creed of the underworld. Castellano's early life wasn't without its brush with direct illegality. At the age of 19, he was convicted of robbery. Though he only served a mere 3 months in jail, this incident was formative. Crucially, during his time in custody, he steadfastly refused to cooperate with authorities, embodying the very essence of the Omerta Code. This early conviction and his unwavering silence cemented his reputation for loyalty within the emerging criminal underworld. 3 months in jail for a young man from his background was more than just a punishment. It was a rite of passage. His refusal to name names, his silent stoicism in the face of questioning, sent a clear message to those who mattered. Paul Castellano was reliable. He could be trusted. He understood the code. This singular event, far from being a setback, solidified his standing, marking him as a man of principle in a world where principle was measured by one's capacity for unwavering silence. It was a clear demonstration of the foundational loyalty that was paramount for advancement in this clandestine society. The narrative of Paul Castellano is inextricably linked to another titan of the underworld, one of the most cunning and respected figures in mafia history, Carlo Gambino. The connection wasn't just professional, it was deeply familial. Paul's sister Catherine was married to Carlo Gambino, a familial bond that provided an early and powerful entry point into one of New York City's most formidable crime syndicates, then known as the Mangano family. This wasn't merely a casual acquaintance, it was a deeply rooted alliance, a blood connection that would shape the trajectory of Castellano's entire life. This familial connection was a foundational pillar of Castellano's ascent. In a world built on trust and bloodlines, such a link was more valuable than any resume or street reputation alone. Think about the immense weight of such a connection in a world where loyalty was paramount and trust was a currency more valuable than gold. Being related by marriage to a figure like Carlo Gambino wasn't just a leg up, it was an invitation into the inner sanctum, a promise of protection and opportunity that most could only dream of. It cemented his position within the echelons of power from the very beginning. Gambino himself, a master strategist, understood the power of family bonds, and he saw in Paul a keen mind, a man who could navigate not just the rough streets, but the even rougher waters of complex business dealings. It set the stage for a career that would be defined by both calculated business moves and, paradoxically, brutal violence. Castellano's progression within the organized crime structure was methodical and strategically engineered. He rose through the ranks of the Mangano crime family, the direct precursor to the powerful Gambino family. His early career saw him eventually becoming a capo, a captain, under the formidable Albert Anastasia, a figure whose very name struck fear into the hearts of many, famously known as the Lord High Executioner. This period marks a significant transition for Castellano, from a street-level operator to a recognized leader within the organization. It was during this time that he honed the skills that would later define his leadership, not just in brute force, but in the subtle art of negotiation, management, and strategic thinking within a clandestine network. It's fascinating to consider the evolution of these organizations. They weren't static entities. They were constantly evolving, adapting, and, at times, violently reshaping themselves. The shift from the Anastasia-led Mangano era to the Gambino era was a turbulent one, marked by internal power struggles and leadership changes that would echo through decades. Castellano, a quiet observer and astute learner, was perfectly positioned to navigate these treacherous waters, learning from both the brutality of Anastasia and the cunning of Gambino. Following Anastasia's dramatic bloody murder in 1957, Carlo Gambino seized firm control of the family, consolidating his power. It was a moment of profound change, and in this new landscape, Gambino made a crucial appointment that underscored his trust and vision for the family's future. He appointed Paul Castellano as a second underboss. This wasn't a traditional underboss role, however. Castellano was specifically tasked with overseeing the family's burgeoning white-collar and business interests. Meanwhile, the primary underboss, the formidable Neil Della Croce, continued to manage the more traditional street-level rackets, the dirty work of gambling, loan sharking, and protection. This strategic division of labor reveals Gambino's forward-thinking approach and Castellano's unique skill set, positioning him as the architect of a new, legitimate criminal enterprise. Imagine the striking contrast. On one side, Neil Della Croce, the quintessential street boss, a man deeply embedded in the gritty realities of protection rackets, gambling, and loan sharking, whose hands were metaphorically, and often literally, stained with the grim necessities of the underworld. And on the other, Paul Castellano, navigating the intricate world of legitimate enterprises, seemingly operating within the bounds of law, albeit with a dark undercurrent of illicit influence. This division was not accidental. It was a deliberate strategy by Gambino to diversify the family's portfolio, recognizing that true power wasn't just in intimidation, but in the quiet, sophisticated accumulation of legitimate wealth. Castellano truly earned his moniker as a businessman within the mafia. His entrepreneurial spirit led him to run seemingly legitimate enterprises, most notably Dial Poultry, a sprawling chicken distribution business that reportedly supplied major supermarkets across the Northeast. But his influence extended far beyond poultry. He gained significant, often corrupt, control over lucrative construction and concrete contracts, a sphere of influence so pervasive it earned the ominous nickname, the Concrete Club. This was facilitated by deep-seated connections within the powerful Teamsters Union, a labor organization that, at the time, was notoriously susceptible to influence and exploitation by organized crime. Picture the scene: trucks emblazoned with Dial Poultry logos, delivering fresh meat across the city, while beneath the surface, the profits flowed back into the coffers of a criminal enterprise. Or imagine the concrete mixers churning, building the very foundations of New York's skyline, with every pore quietly lining the pockets of the Gambino family. It's a stark reminder of how deeply intertwined these illicit operations could become with the very fabric of everyday life, operating in plain sight, yet utterly invisible to the unsuspecting public. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many of the buildings we walk by every day, how much of the food we consume might have had unseen strings attached, connecting back to the very figures we're discussing? The hidden costs of convenience. This was Castellano's domain. He wasn't primarily a street enforcer. He was a silent partner in the city's economic machinery, a master of backroom deals and subtle coercion, leveraging his influence to ensure a steady, seemingly endless stream of revenue for the family. His focus was on the long game, on building a financial empire that was less vulnerable to the unpredictable violence of street rackets and more immune to direct law enforcement scrutiny. When Carlo Gambino, the revered and shrewd boss, finally passed away in 1976 after a long and influential reign, he made a decision that would forever alter the course of the Gambino family. In a move that shocked many and solidified the family's internal divisions, he explicitly named Paul Castellano as his successor, deliberately bypassing the popular, fiercely loyal, and universally respected underboss, Neil Della Croce. This decision was a strategic bombshell, designed to shift the family's direction, but ultimately sowing the seeds of its undoing and igniting a simmering civil war. Imagine the shockwaves that rippled through the family. Della Croce was a street legend, deeply admired by the rank and file, a man who had bled for the organization, a true man of honor in their twisted code. Castellano, while respected for his business acumen, lacked the same kind of visceral connection with the street soldiers, the daily grind, the shared sacrifices. This wasn't just a change in leadership, it was a profound philosophical shift, a deliberate statement about the direction Gambino envisioned for the family's future. A future he saw moving away from traditional, risky rackets and into more sophisticated, less violent business ventures, a clean corporate image. It's almost Shakespearean, isn't it? The dying king's decree, intended to solidify his legacy and ensure a smooth transition, instead ignites a powder keg of resentment and division. This decision immediately split the Gambino family into two distinct factions: the Zips, or Castellano loyalists, and the Deltas, or Della Croce loyalists. It was an immediate and potent source of internal tension that would fester and grow, eventually reaching a violent crescendo. The loyalties were divided, and the stage was set for a power struggle that would redefine the very nature of the American mafia, ultimately leading to a bloodbath. Castellano's leadership style was a stark departure from the traditional image of a mafia don. He was more corporate, more detached, focusing on large-scale business operations rather than the daily grind of street-level rackets. He famously preferred to conduct meetings in his opulent Staten Island mansion, rather than the more traditional, communal settings of social clubs. This strategic pivot, while financially lucrative, alienated a significant portion of the family, particularly those who had come up through the ranks alongside the beloved Della Croce. Castellano's corporate approach clashed fundamentally with the traditionalist, street-oriented ethos of many family members, creating a deep chasm of resentment. Picture it: the made men who had risked their lives in countless street skirmishes, who had grown up understanding power through intimidation and brute force, now reporting to a boss who preferred spreadsheets to street corners, boardrooms to back alleys. It bred a deep-seated resentment, a feeling that the very essence of their way of life was being diluted, even betrayed. Loyalty in this world wasn't just about following orders. It was about shared experiences, mutual respect, and a common understanding of the rules. Castellano's approach, while perhaps forward-thinking in a business sense, overlooked the deeply personal and emotional bonds, the street cred, that held such an organization together. His pursuit of legitimacy, ironically, made him appear illegitimate in the eyes of many. There's a profound human element to this shift that's often overlooked. These were men who lived by a code, however twisted, and when that code seemed to be abandoned or redefined, it created a profound sense of disillusionment, a feeling of being unmoored. It's a classic tale of old guard versus new, of tradition clashing with innovation, but played out in a world where the stakes were life and death, where perceived slights could lead to brutal consequences. The whispers of discontent grew louder, evolving into a chorus of resentment. Despite his corporate leanings and desire for a clean image, Castellano was still very much a man of the mafia, and his reign was not without its brutal personal decisions. In 1975, a year before he became boss, he ordered the murder of his own daughter's boyfriend, Frank Amato, a plumber. Amato had reportedly disrespected Castellano's daughter and was also rumored to have been a drug addict, a significant breach of the family's unwritten rules. As Castellano abhorred drug dealing due to the harsh penalties it brought down from law enforcement. The murder was allegedly carried out by Roy DeMeo, a notoriously brutal and psychopathic hitman, and Amato's body was dismembered and never found, believed to have been disposed of at sea. This deeply personal act, a father ordering the murder of his own daughter's partner for perceived disrespect and breaking a cardinal rule, is a chilling reminder of the absolute authority these men wielded, even over matters of the heart and the sanctity of personal relationships. It illustrates the moral vacuum in which they often operated, where loyalty to the family, both blood and criminal, superseded all other considerations, including love and personal connection. It's a stark, almost primal demonstration of power, and it sent an unmistakable message. No one, absolutely no one, was beyond the reach of Castellano's judgment or the brutal consequences of violating his rules. Can you truly imagine the internal conflict, the twisted logic that must have justified such a horrific act in his own mind? It's a stark window into the moral landscape of this world, where personal code and institutional power blurred into a terrifying force. As the years of Castellano's leadership wore on, the internal tensions simmered, transforming from whispers into a roaring undercurrent of dissatisfaction. His perceived detachment from the traditional street operations, coupled with his incredibly opulent lifestyle, he famously lived in a sprawling, white-columned mansion known as the White House on Staten Island, further fueled resentment among the rank and file. They saw him as out of touch, a boss more concerned with his own immense wealth and personal comfort than with the well-being of the soldiers who risked their lives for the family, often struggling to make ends meet while facing lengthy prison sentences. The White House on Staten Island became more than just a home. It was a potent, glaring symbol of this disconnect. While many of the family's soldiers scraped by, putting their freedom and lives on the line daily, Castellano was living in a palace, a stark contrast that bred deep envy and a profound sense of injustice. He conducted meetings there, often requiring capos to wait for hours, further asserting his perceived superiority. It wasn't just about money, it was about respect, about a perceived breach of the unwritten contract between the boss and his men, a betrayal of the shared struggle that was supposed to bind them. This is a crucial lesson in leadership, even in the illicit world. A leader who loses touch with their base, who appears to elevate themselves above the struggles of their followers, is a leader on borrowed time. It's a universal principle, regardless of the context, and it was a fatal misstep for Paul Castellano. Meanwhile, within the disgruntled faction, a charismatic, ruthless, and highly ambitious figure was steadily gaining influence and notoriety. John Gotti. Gotti, a protege of the now aging Neil Della Croce, was everything Castellano was not. He was flamboyant, street-savvy, intensely loyal to Della Croce, and deeply connected to the traditional ways of the mafia. He openly defied Castellano's strict ban on drug dealing, a dangerous gamble that would ultimately put him in Castellano's crosshairs. Gotti was seen as a man of the people, a champion of the old guard, and he masterfully exploited the growing discontent with Castellano's leadership to his immense advantage. John Gotti emerged as the charismatic, streetwise counterpoint to Castellano's corporate image, becoming the rallying point for all who felt alienated by the boss's rule. Gotti was a master manipulator, a showman who understood the power of perception and the vital importance of street cred. He cultivated an image of a fearless leader, a man who wouldn't shy away from a fight, who mingled freely with his soldiers, a stark contrast to the perceived aloofness of Castellano. He became the magnetic rallying point for all those who felt disenfranchised, for those who longed for a return to the good old days of the mafia, where loyalty was repaid with protection and respect was earned in the streets, not in boardrooms. Gotti's crew, particularly Angelo Ruggiero, were deeply involved in drug trafficking, a direct affront to Castellano's most stringent rule. When wiretaps revealed Gotti's associates discussing their drug dealing, Castellano began demanding the transcripts, a move that ignited a palpable fear in Gotti. Fear of being sanctioned, perhaps even killed, for his insubordination. The stage was set. The inevitable climax arrived on December 16, 1985. The immediate catalyst was the death of Neil Della Croce just days earlier. Castellano's blatant disrespect by not attending Della Croce's funeral was the final, unforgivable insult for Gotti and his faction. The setting was Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan, a seemingly innocuous upscale restaurant that would forever be etched into the annals of mafia history. Paul Castellano, along with his newly appointed underboss, Thomas Bellotti, arrived for a dinner meeting, blissfully unaware of the grim destiny awaiting them. What they didn't know was that they were walking into a meticulously planned ambush, orchestrated by John Gotti himself. Imagine the scene: the crisp December air, the glow of the city lights reflecting off wet pavement, the unassuming facade of a popular steakhouse, its windows radiating warmth, and the chatter of diners, utterly oblivious to the grim drama about to unfold just outside. Castellano, accustomed to a life of guarded privilege, likely felt secure, perhaps even smug, surrounded by his trusted associates. But betrayal, as it often does, came from within. The cold calculation of Gotti's ambition, fueled by years of resentment and the very real threat of Castellano's wrath over the drug dealing, had reached its boiling point. There's a particular kind of dread that accompanies the understanding of an impending, inevitable tragedy. For Castellano, that evening began as any other, a routine dinner, a casual rendezvous. But for John Gotti and his faction, it was the culmination of months, if not years, of planning, plotting, and simmering resentment. The air must have been thick with unspoken tension, a silent countdown to a moment that would rip through the very heart of the Gambino family, irrevocably changing its trajectory and, indeed, the broader landscape of American organized crime. As Castellano and Bellotti stepped out of their black Lincoln Continental sedan, clad in matching trench coats and Russian fur hats, a hit team, allegedly comprised of John Gotti's own crew members, including Salvatore Sammy the Bull, Gravano, and Gene Gotti, unleashed a barrage of gunfire. Both men were instantly killed, their lives brutally extinguished on the cold Manhattan pavement, their bodies crumpling outside one of New York's most famous eateries. John Gotti himself, reportedly watching from a nearby parked car using walkie-talkies to coordinate the hit, then drove by the scene to confirm the deed was done, a chilling testament to his direct involvement. The assassination of Castellano and Bellotti was a public, audacious, and unprecedented act of violence, a brazen coup d'etat that shattered the existing mafia hierarchy. The sheer audacity of the hit was staggering. To execute a mafia boss, especially one as powerful and connected as Castellano, in such a public and brazen manner, without the sanction of the commission, was an act almost unheard of. It was a declaration, a thunderclap that echoed not just through the underworld, but through the streets of New York, across the nation and beyond. It wasn't just a murder, it was a carefully calculated coup, a public act of war designed to send an unmistakable, terrifying message. The old order was dead, and a new, more ruthless one had arrived. Gotti had literally paved his way to power with the blood of his predecessor, publicly challenging the foundational rules of the criminal empire. Have you ever considered the true ripple effects of a single decisive act, and how one moment of extreme violence can alter the course of an entire power structure, even dictate the direction of an entire criminal syndicate for decades to come? This was precisely that moment, a seismic shift. This bold murder was more than just a change in leadership. It was a profound turning point in mafia history. It flagrantly shattered traditional protocols that dictated that a boss could only be killed with the explicit approval of the commission, the ruling body composed of the heads of the 5 New York crime families. Gotti's unsanctioned act was a direct, audacious challenge to the established order, a daring break from centuries of underworld etiquette and the delicate balance of power that had kept the peace, however violent, among the families. This act directly violated one of the most sacred unwritten rules of the mafia. You do not kill a boss without the commission's approval. Gotti's move was an act of blatant defiance, a power play that risked bringing down the full wrath of the other families, potentially sparking an all-out mafia war across the entire city. It speaks volumes about Gotti's ambition, his recklessness, and his calculated risk-taking. He understood that sometimes, to seize ultimate power and impose a new vision, you have to burn the rulebook, to cast aside tradition and fear no consequence. But such a dramatic break often comes with severe long-term consequences, not just for the individual, but for the entire system they operate within. It was a gamble that paid off in the short term, but ultimately cost him everything. The immediate aftermath was predictable. The killing sparked further violence within the Gambino family, as Gotti swiftly consolidated his power and eliminated any lingering dissenters or Castellano loyalists. But beyond the internal strife, the brazen assassination also drew unprecedented attention from law enforcement, intensifying the pressure on the mafia across the board. The public audacious nature of the hit made it impossible for authorities to ignore. The reverberations of the Sparks Steakhouse massacre were felt for years, even decades. It was a catalyst for a period of immense scrutiny and pressure on organized crime throughout the United States. The public nature of the hit and the flagrant disregard for established rules made it a rallying cry for law enforcement. It was as if Gotti, in his ambition, had thrown down a gauntlet, daring the authorities to respond, practically inviting the spotlight that would eventually consume him. The era of the Teflon Don was about to begin, but so too was an era of unprecedented law enforcement focus on the mob. If you're finding this deep dive into the hidden currents of power and its dramatic consequences as compelling as I am, take a moment to hit that like button. It truly helps this channel reach more people who are fascinated by these untold stories, allowing us to continue peeling back the layers of history together. Following the brazen assassination, John Gotti rapidly ascended to the position of boss of the Gambino family, ushering in a new, more flamboyant and public era for the organization. He quickly became known as the Dapper Don for his expensive, custom-tailored suits and his seemingly media-savvy persona. He thrived in the spotlight, holding court outside courthouses, captivating the public imagination, and becoming a figure of both fear and fascination. This was a stark contrast to Castellano's reclusive and business-oriented nature. Gotti reveled in the spotlight, almost daring law enforcement to catch him. He held court in public. His image splashed across newspapers and television screens. He understood the power of perception, of controlling the narrative, even in the criminal underworld. For a time, he seemed invincible, earning the nickname Teflon Don after being acquitted in 3 separate trials in the late 1980s, largely due to jury tampering and witness intimidation. It was a complete reversal from Castellano's quiet, corporate approach. And for a period, it seemed to work, captivating the public and frustrating the authorities to no end. He was a gangster for the television age. However, Gotti's reign, while initially appearing invincible, would ultimately be undone by a force more powerful than any hit team, more insidious than any law enforcement agency: betrayal from within. In 1992, Gotti was finally convicted of Castellano's murder, among other charges including racketeering and obstruction of justice. The linchpin of the prosecution's case was the damning, unprecedented testimony of Salvatore "Sammy the Bull" Gravano, Gotti's own underboss, who broke the sacred code of omerta, turned state's evidence, and provided devastating insider information about Gotti's every criminal act, including the Castellano hit. Gotti's own underboss, Sammy Gravano, became the key to his downfall, leading to his conviction for Castellano's murder and marking a monumental shift in law enforcement's ability to penetrate the mafia. The irony is profound and chilling. Castellano, a man who tried to operate with a veneer of legitimate business, was ultimately betrayed by the very forces of tradition and street power he sought to move beyond. And Gotti, the man who reveled in the street code, who flaunted his loyalty and demanded unwavering fealty, was ultimately undone by a betrayal from his closest confidant, a man he had implicitly trusted with his life. It's a cyclical narrative of trust, ambition, and the ever-present threat of a knife in the back in this world. The very loyalty he so vehemently demanded was ultimately his spectacular undoing. Doesn't it strike you how often, in these narratives of immense power and intricate conspiracies, the most devastating blows come not from external enemies, but from those closest to you? It's a timeless human drama, played out with life and death stakes, a profound lesson in the fragility of absolute power. Paul Castellano was ultimately laid to rest in a quiet cemetery on Staten Island. However, due to his notorious criminal life and the public nature of his illicit activities, the Catholic Church formally refused him a funeral mass. This wasn't a minor detail in his final rites. It was a significant, powerful, symbolic rejection in a community where religious rites and a proper Catholic burial held deep cultural and spiritual importance for generations of Italian Americans. In the end, even in death, Paul Castellano remained an outsider, denied the spiritual solace and communal farewell that even the humblest of men often receive. The refusal of a funeral mass was more than just a religious decree. It was a profound cultural rebuke, a judgment passed not just by men, but by faith itself. For a man who sought control over so much, who aspired to legitimize his life and his operations, this final, deeply personal denial of a traditional farewell must have been a stark, humbling, and perhaps deeply unsettling end. It illustrates the profound conflict between earthly power and spiritual reckoning, a final, unshakable judgment on a life lived outside conventional morality. Imagine the weight of that refusal, the quiet condemnation from an institution that touches so many lives and plays such a central role in the cultural identity of his community. For a man who sought to legitimize his life, to build an empire that mimicked the corporate world, this final, deeply personal rejection was perhaps the ultimate undoing of his carefully constructed image. It highlights the profound, lasting conflict between worldly power and spiritual peace. In summary, Paul Castellano was a powerful and influential mafia boss who, during his tenure, attempted to fundamentally modernize the Gambino family's business operations, shifting its focus towards more legitimate, or at least seemingly legitimate, enterprises. He was a visionary in his own way, one who truly foresaw a future where the power of organized crime lay not just in brute force, but in the sophisticated accumulation of wealth and influence through economic leverage. His story is a compelling case study in the immense complexities of leadership and the often insurmountable challenges of implementing radical change within deeply entrenched systems. He sought to steer a leviathan, a sprawling criminal empire, but ultimately the powerful undertow of tradition, the fiercely loyal adherence to the old ways, and the unrestrained ambition of those who clung to them proved too strong. His efforts to professionalize and legitimize the mafia were ultimately consumed by the very primitive violence and betrayal he tried to rise above. But beyond the dry facts and the grim details of his dramatic demise, Castellano's story offers us a far deeper, more unsettling reflection. It's a powerful testament to the enduring allure of power and the often destructive paths people choose in its relentless pursuit. It highlights the intricate, often terrifying web of loyalty and betrayal that defines human relationships, especially when extraordinary stakes are involved. And it reminds us that even the most carefully constructed empires, whether criminal or conventional, are ultimately built on the shifting sands of human ambition, vulnerability, and the unpredictable forces of character. His life, marked by both strategic brilliance and profound misjudgment, serves as a powerful, cautionary parable. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that even those who operate outside the bounds of law are, at their core, driven by universal human desires for control, for security, for legacy, for recognition. And in that, in the raw, often brutal tapestry of their lives, we find a subtle, unsettling connection to our own aspirations and the choices we make every single day. His pursuit of a cleaner empire ironically led to a bloodier end, a stark reminder that some destinies are simply inevitable. Paul Castellano's ambition was to build a different kind of empire, one that blurred the lines between the underworld and legitimate enterprise, a vision perhaps decades ahead of its time. He saw a future where power was wielded through the quiet, insidious force of finance, not the blunt instrument of violence. Yet his vision was ultimately consumed by the very forces he sought to transcend, the visceral, often brutal, realities of the world he had helped to build. His life and his dramatic public end serve as a potent reminder that while we may strive to control our narratives, some stories are simply too powerful, too deeply etched in the human condition to be fully contained or rewritten. It's a story that echoes across time, urging us to consider not just the figures themselves, but the complex systems that empower them, the profound choices they make, and the enduring ripple effects of those decisions across society. These narratives aren't just about crime. They're about the timeless dance between control and chaos, between tradition and innovation, and the ever-present human quest for dominance, for meaning, for a legacy. If Paul Castellano's story has stirred something within you, prompting you to look a little closer at the unseen threads that weave through history and society, then our journey together is truly just beginning. There are countless more tales of ambition, struggle, and transformation waiting to be uncovered, each offering a unique lens through which to understand our shared human experience and the intricate forces that shape our world. So, if you're ready to continue exploring these profound stories, to unravel more hidden histories, and perhaps even discover a little more about yourself in the process, then make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Hit that notification bell to join our community of curious minds and be a part of this ongoing exploration. Because the most impactful stories often aren't found in textbooks, but in the nuanced, emotional landscapes of lives lived on the edge, leaving us with enduring lessons about the very nature of humanity and the price of power. We have so many more layers to uncover, so many more stories to tell, and I truly believe they can offer us powerful insights into the world we inhabit today.